The gunshot echoed across the parched Texas plains, sending a flock of startled birds into the azure sky, as Scarlett Reynolds tightened her grip on the reins and urged her horse forward. The year was 1878, and trouble had been following her like a shadow since she'd fled San Angelo 3 days prior, leaving behind nothing but whispers and the body of a man who'd made the mistake of thinking her defenseless. "Come on, Whisper," she muttered to her dapple gray mare, leaning forward in the saddle. Just a little further. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, whipping around her face as she rode hard toward the distant silhouette of a small town. The wound on her side throbbed with each hoofbeat, the hastily wrapped bandage doing little to stem the slow seep of blood. She'd been lucky the bullet had only grazed her, but luck had a way of running thin, especially for women who shot cattle barons' sons. Willow Creek appeared on the horizon, a humble collection of wooden structures nestled in the foothills of the Davis Mountains. To most, it wouldn't look like salvation, but to Scarlett, it was as close as she was likely to get. Her original plan had been to ride straight through to New Mexico territory, but her injury and dwindling supplies had forced a change in strategy. The town's main street was quiet in the late afternoon heat when she rode in, the few people outside stopping to stare at the disheveled woman on the trail-worn horse. Scarlett kept her head high, ignoring the suspicious glances, as she made her way to the livery stable at the far end of town. "Your horse looks about done in, miss," said the stable hand, a gangly youth with freckles scattered across his sunburned face. "She needs water and rest," Scarlett replied, dismounting carefully to hide her wince of pain. "I'll pay extra if you'll give her special attention." "Yes, madam," the boy nodded, taking the reins. "That'll be 50 cents for the night." Scarlett handed over the coins along with an additional quarter. "What's your name, boy?" "Tommy, madam." "Well, Tommy, Whisper here is special to me. Take good care of her." "Yes, madam, I will." With her horse settled, Scarlett adjusted her hat to better shield her face and made her way toward the town's lone hotel. Her saddlebags hung heavy over one shoulder, containing everything she now owned in the world: a change of clothes, her father's pistol, her mother's locket, and nearly $800 in cash that had once belonged to Gerald Blackwell, the man who tried to force himself on her back in San Angelo. The Willow Creek Hotel was a 2-story wooden structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but the lobby was clean, and the woman behind the desk didn't ask too many questions when Scarlett requested a room. "Just passing through?" the older woman asked as she handed over a key. "Yes," Scarlett replied, offering nothing more. "Well, we've got hot water if you want a bath. Extra 2 bits." "I'll take it." An hour later, Scarlett sat on the edge of the narrow bed in her room, dressed in clean clothes with her damp hair hanging loose down her back. She'd cleaned and rebandaged her wound, using the last of the whiskey in her flask to disinfect it. The injury wasn't serious, but it needed tending, and she couldn't risk seeing the town doctor. A knock at her door sent her hand immediately to her pistol. "Who is it?" she called, tension evident in her voice. "Supper, miss," came the reply. "The missus sent it up, said you looked like you could use a hot meal." Scarlett hesitated before opening the door a crack. A young girl stood outside holding a tray with a covered plate and a cup of steaming coffee. "Thank you," Scarlett said, taking the tray and placing a coin in the girl's hand. "Missus says to tell you the sheriff's back in town," the girl added, pocketing the coin. "Just thought you might want to know." The statement wasn't innocent, and both of them knew it. Scarlett forced a smile. "Is that so? Well, I'm sure he's a fine lawman." The girl shrugged and turned away, leaving Scarlett to close and lock the door behind her. She set the tray on the small table by the window and drew the curtains closed before sitting down to eat. The meal was simple beef stew, cornbread, and coffee, but it was the first hot food she'd had in days, and she savored every bite. As she ate, she considered her options. Staying in Willow Creek was risky. Word traveled fast in these parts, and it wouldn't take long for news of what had happened in San Angelo to reach here. But pushing on in her condition wasn't wise either. She needed at least a day or two to recover her strength before continuing her journey. A commotion in the street below drew her attention. Setting aside her empty plate, Scarlett moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon across the street, their voices raised in greeting. At the center of the group was a tall figure on horseback, a man with broad shoulders and a black Stetson pulled low over his eyes. The sheriff, she assumed, watching as he dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He clasped hands with several of the men before they all disappeared into the saloon together. Scarlett let the curtain fall back into place, best to stay out of sight until morning. She spent the night restlessly, waking at every creak and footstep in the hallway outside her room. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She would leave Willow Creek immediately, heading west toward the New Mexico border. The sooner she put Texas behind her, the better. The morning was cool and clear as Scarlett made her way back to the livery stable, her hat pulled low and her collar turned up against the chill. "Morning, madam," Tommy greeted her cheerfully. "Your mare's looking much better today." "Good," Scarlett replied, offering a rare smile. "I need to be on my way." "Yes, madam, I'll saddle her up for you." As the boy prepared Whisper for travel, Scarlett glanced around the stable, mentally cataloging her supplies. She would need to stop at the general store for provisions, a risky but necessary delay. Heading out so soon. The deep voice from behind her sent a jolt of alarm through Scarlett's body. She turned slowly, her right hand instinctively moving toward the pistol concealed beneath her jacket. The man standing in the stable doorway was tall and lean, dressed in denim and leather with a gun belt slung low on his hips. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of his black hat, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw and the slight curl at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but close. "Sheriff Kingston Hayes," he introduced himself, touching the silver star pinned to his vest. "Don't believe I've had the pleasure, miss." "Smith," she lied smoothly. "Sarah Smith." His eyes, a striking blue even in the dim light of the stable, held hers for a long moment, and Scarlett knew with absolute certainty that he didn't believe her. "Miss Smith," he repeated, stepping further into the stable. "Just passing through our little town." "That's right," she replied, forcing herself to stand still despite the urge to back away. "Just stopped for the night. I'll be on my way now." Sheriff Hayes moved closer, his gaze sweeping over her in an assessing manner that made her skin prickle. "Where are you headed, if you don't mind my asking?" "West," she said shortly. "Visiting family." "Is that so?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Funny thing, Miss Smith. I just rode in from El Paso yesterday, and I heard some interesting news from San Angelo. Seems a young woman shot and killed Gerald Blackwell, son of one of the biggest cattle barons in the county." Scarlett's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. "I hadn't heard." "How terrible." He nodded. "Terrible indeed. The young woman disappeared afterward. Description matches you quite closely: dark hair, green eyes, riding a dapple gray mare." "There are plenty of women with dark hair in Texas, Sheriff," she replied, proud of how steady her voice remained. "And plenty of gray horses." "That's true," he agreed, taking another step toward her. "But not many with a fresh bullet wound." Scarlett's hand flew to her side before she could stop herself, confirming his suspicion. The sheriff's expression softened unexpectedly. "I'm not looking to cause you trouble, Miss Reynolds." The use of her real name shocked her into silence. "Yes, I know who you are," he continued. "Word travels fast. I also know Gerald Blackwell's reputation with women. Whatever happened between you two, I doubt it was unprovoked." "It wasn't," Scarlett said, finding her voice at last. "He tried to force himself on me. I defended myself." "I believe you," Sheriff Hayes replied simply. "But Jason Blackwell doesn't care about the truth. He's offering a $1,000 reward for his son's killer, dead or alive." Scarlett's blood ran cold. A bounty that size would attract every gun for hire and glory seeker in the territory. "So what now, Sheriff?" she asked, lifting her chin defiantly. "Are you planning to collect that reward?" His mouth curved into a full smile then, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "No, madam, I'm planning to help you disappear." Scarlett stared at him, disbelief warring with desperate hope. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Let's just say I've got my reasons," he replied cryptically. "And they involve not seeing a woman hanged for protecting herself from a man who should have known better." For a long moment, Scarlett studied him, searching for any sign of deception in his clear blue gaze. Finding none, she made her decision. "I'm nothing but trouble," she warned. The cowboy smiled and said, "I've always liked trouble." Kingston Hayes had been sheriff of Willow Creek for just over 3 years, a position he'd never intended to hold for long. He drifted into town after a decade of wandering, looking for nothing more than a place to rest for a while, maybe earn enough money to move on. Then the previous sheriff had been shot dead in a robbery gone wrong, and the town council had all but begged him to pin on the star. He'd agreed to stay until they found someone permanent. 3 years later, he was still waiting. Now, as he led Scarlett Reynolds out of town by a little used-back trail, Kingston wondered if his time in Willow Creek was finally coming to an end. Helping a fugitive escape the law, even a law as corrupted by money and influence as that in San Angelo, wasn't something a sheriff should do. But the moment he'd heard about the Blackwell shooting, he'd known he would intervene if given the chance. "We'll head northwest," he explained, keeping his voice low even though they were well away from town now. "There's an old line shack about 15 miles from here. We can rest there tonight, then continue on to my friend's ranch near the New Mexico border tomorrow." Scarlett, riding beside him with her shoulders tense and her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, nodded. "And your friend will help us. Sam Winters owes me his life," Kingston replied. "He won't turn us away." "Us?" she questioned, glancing at him with a raised eyebrow. "You're planning to come with me, for a while," he confirmed. "At least until I'm sure you're safe. Jason Blackwell's influence doesn't extend much beyond Texas, but his money does, and money can buy a lot of trouble." Scarlett was silent for a moment, obviously weighing her options. "Why are you really doing this, Sheriff Hayes?" Kingston's jaw tightened as memories he'd spent years trying to bury resurfaced. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to be hunted for something that wasn't your fault." Before she could press for more details, he urged his horse forward, effectively ending the conversation. They rode in silence for the next several hours, following game trails and dry creek beds, avoiding the main roads where they might be spotted by other travelers. By late afternoon, the line shack came into view, a small, rough-hewn structure nestled in a grove of scrub oak. It wasn't much, but it would provide shelter for the night. "It's not exactly the Willow Creek Hotel," Kingston said as they dismounted, "but it's secure and nobody's likely to come looking here." "It's fine," Scarlett assured him, leading her mare to the lean-to beside the shack. "I've slept in worse places." They tended to the horses together, working in a companionable silence that surprised Kingston. Most people felt the need to fill the quiet with chatter, but Scarlett seemed as comfortable with silence as he was. It was refreshing. Inside, the shack was spare but clean. A narrow bed occupied one corner, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat in another, and a small iron stove took up much of the remaining space. Kingston busied himself lighting the stove while Scarlett inspected their surroundings. "You use this place often?" she asked, running a finger along the dusty windowsill. "Not for a while," he admitted, "but I keep it stocked with the basics. There should be some canned beans and coffee in that cupboard by the stove." Scarlett found the supplies and set about preparing a simple meal while Kingston retrieved his bedroll from his saddlebags. "I'll sleep outside," he said, gesturing toward the bed. "You take that." She looked like she might argue but then nodded. "Thank you." They ate their beans and drank their coffee as twilight settled over the land, neither saying much. Kingston watched her covertly, noting the graceful way she moved despite her injury, the wariness that never quite left her eyes, the strength evident in her slender frame. Scarlett Reynolds was clearly a woman accustomed to handling her own problems, which made her grudging acceptance of his help all the more significant. "How's your side?" he asked as she cleared away their empty plates. "It's healing," she replied with a shrug. "The bullet just grazed me." "I was lucky. Mind if I take a look? Wounds can turn bad fast out here." Scarlett hesitated, then nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed and carefully lifting the side of her shirt to reveal a strip of cloth wrapped around her ribs. Kingston knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he unwound the makeshift bandage. The wound beneath was red and angry-looking but showed no signs of infection. Still, it was deeper than she'd let on, and he frowned at the thought of how much pain she must be in. "You should have seen a doctor," he murmured, reaching for his saddlebag to retrieve a small tin of salve. "Doctors ask questions," she replied simply. "Fair enough." He applied the salve carefully, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her soft skin. "This will help with the pain and keep infection away." Scarlett watched him work, her expression unreadable. "You've done this before." "More times than I care to remember," he confirmed, wrapping a fresh bandage around her ribs. "Spent some time as an Army scout after the war." "You learn a thing or two about field medicine in that line of work." "The war? You don't look old enough to have fought," Kingston smiled ruefully. "I was young, lied about my age to enlist. 17 when I joined up with the Union, 19 when it ended. And now?" 35 last spring, he replied, securing the bandage and sitting back on his heels. "Old enough to know better than to get involved in something like this, I suppose." Scarlett tugged her shirt back into place, her green eyes meeting his directly. "So why are you?" Kingston stood, gathering up the medical supplies and returning them to his bag. "Like I said, I've been in your position, running from something I couldn't change with people hunting me who didn't care about the truth." "What happened?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing his past with anyone, but something about Scarlett Reynolds made him want to trust her, despite every instinct honed by years of solitude warning him against it. "I killed a man," he finally said, his voice low. "A powerful man's son, much like your situation. Only difference was, I was wearing a badge at the time." Scarlett waited silently for him to continue. "It was my first job as a lawman in a little town not much bigger than Willow Creek. The mayor's son was drunk, threatening a young woman outside the saloon. I intervened and he pulled a knife on me." Kingston's face hardened at the memory. "I shot him. The mayor claimed his son was unarmed, that I murdered him in cold blood, had witnesses who swore to it, too." "What did you do?" "The only thing I could do, I ran." Kingston shrugged. "Spent the next few years drifting, staying one step ahead of the bounty hunters the mayor sent after me. Eventually, word came that the mayor had died and his widow had dropped the charges. By then, I'd already become someone else. Scarlett absorbed this in silence, her expression thoughtful. And no one in Willow Creek knows this story. No one, he confirmed, and I'd prefer to keep it that way. Your secret is safe with me, she assured him. It seems we have more in common than I thought, Sheriff Hayes. Kingston, he corrected her, or King. I think we're well past formalities at this point. A small smile curved her lips. Kingston, she repeated, testing the name. I'm Scarlett, though I suppose you already knew that. Scarlett, he echoed, liking the way it felt on his tongue. It suits you. An unexpected blush colored her cheeks and she looked away, breaking the moment of connection between them. I should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. That it will, Kingston agreed, moving toward the door. Good night, Scarlett. Good night, Kingston. Outside, Kingston spread his bedroll beneath the lean-to and stretched out, his rifle close at hand. Above him, stars filled the vast Texas sky, bright and distant. He doubted he would sleep much tonight, too aware of the woman inside the shack and the danger that followed her like a shadow. As he told her, he understood what it was like to be hunted. What he hadn't mentioned was how lonely that life could be, how it wore away at your soul until you began to believe you deserved your fate. He'd seen the same haunted look in Scarlett's eyes that had once stared back at him from every mirror. Whatever it took, he wouldn't let her suffer that kind of isolation. With that resolution firmly in mind, Kingston finally drifted into a light, vigilant sleep, his hand never straying far from his gun. Dawn broke in a blaze of golden light, painting the landscape in warm hues as Scarlett stepped out of the shack, her hair neatly braided and her saddlebags over one shoulder. She paused, momentarily startled to find Kingston already awake, tending to the horses with quiet efficiency. I thought you might sleep longer, he remarked, glancing up at her approach. Old habits, she replied with a shrug. My father believed anyone who slept past sunrise was wasting daylight. Wise man, Kingston nodded, returning his attention to his gelding's hoof, which he was carefully checking for stones. He was, Scarlett agreed, her voice softening with memory. A Texas Ranger for 20 years before he settled down to ranch. Kingston straightened, his interest piqued. Reynolds. I knew a ranger by that name once. Samuel Reynolds. That was him, Scarlett confirmed, surprised. You knew my father, not well, Kingston admitted. Met him a few times when I was scouting for the Army. He had a reputation as a fair man, tough but honest. He was, she smiled, though there was sadness in her eyes. He died 5 years ago, Spanish influenza. I'm sorry to hear that. Kingston's expression was genuine. What about your mother? She passed when I was 12. It was just me and Pa after that until the fever took him too. Kingston nodded his understanding. Loss was a language they both spoke fluently. So how did you end up in San Angelo? Scarlett moved to her mare, running a hand along the horse's sleek neck as she spoke. After Pa died, I couldn't manage the ranch alone. We were never wealthy and there were debts I didn't know about. I had to sell everything just to pay them off. Ended up taking a job at the Blackwell household as a housekeeper. And that's where you met Gerald, Kingston guessed. Yes, she confirmed, her expression hardening. He'd been making advances since I started working there 3 years ago. I always managed to avoid being alone with him until that night. She paused, taking a deep breath. His father was away on business, and Gerald had been drinking heavily. He cornered me in the pantry, said he was tired of waiting, that I'd been teasing him long enough. Kingston's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to tell her story at her own pace. I tried to push past him, but he grabbed me, tore my dress, Scarlett continued, her voice steady despite the painful memory. There was a struggle. His pistol fell from his holster, and I managed to get hold of it. I warned him to stay back, but he just laughed, said no one would believe a servant over the son of Jason Blackwell. He lunged at me and I fired. You did what you had to do, Kingston said firmly. I know, she nodded, but knowing doesn't make it easier to live with. I took a life, Kingston. Whatever kind of man Gerald Blackwell was, I ended his existence with a single bullet. Kingston moved closer, hesitating only briefly before placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The burden of that will ease with time. You defended yourself against a man who intended you harm. There's no shame in that. Scarlett looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face as if gauging his sincerity. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she offered a small, grateful smile. We should get moving, she said after a moment, stepping away from his touch. How far to your friend's ranch? About a day's ride, Kingston replied, respecting her need to change the subject. If we push hard, we can be there by nightfall. They packed up quickly, erasing all signs of their presence from the line shack, before setting out just as the sun cleared the eastern horizon. Kingston led them on a winding route, following streams where they could to hide their tracks, keeping to the cover of trees and ravines when possible. By midday, they had covered considerable distance, the Davis Mountains rising majestically to their west. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and hardtack, neither willing to risk a fire that might be spotted. Tell me about this friend of yours, Scarlett said as they sat in the shade of an old cottonwood, the horses grazing nearby. The one who owes you his life. Kingston took a drink from his canteen before answering. Sam Winters, former cavalry like me. After the war, he came west, established a decent-sized ranch just over the New Mexico border. It's remote, plenty of space to disappear. And how did you save his life? She pressed, curious. A faint smile crossed Kingston's face. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. We were caught in Apache territory during a scouting mission. Sam took an arrow in the leg, couldn't ride. The commanding officer wanted to leave him behind, said we couldn't risk the whole unit for one man. But you wouldn't leave him, Scarlett guessed. Kingston shrugged. I stayed with him while the others rode on, fought off 2 warriors who came to finish him off, then carried him on my back for nearly 10 miles to rejoin our unit. He swore then he'd repay the debt someday. That sounds plenty dramatic to me, Scarlett remarked, looking at him with new respect. It was a long time ago, Kingston dismissed, uncomfortable with her admiration. Besides, he's returned the favor in his own way over the years, giving me a place to lie low when needed. Like now, she nodded, understanding. Like now, he agreed. Though this is the first time I've brought anyone with me. Something in his tone made Scarlett glance sharply at him, but his expression revealed nothing. After a moment, she stood, brushing dust from her trousers. We should keep moving, she said, and Kingston nodded his agreement. They rode steadily through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they moved northwest, the terrain becoming more rugged. Scarlett noticed Kingston becoming increasingly alert as the day wore on, his hand resting near his pistol, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Something wrong? She asked finally, keeping her voice low. Not sure, he replied, frowning. Just a feeling. We're being watched. Scarlett instinctively checked her own weapon, making sure it was loose in its holster. Bounty hunters, possible, Kingston conceded, or it could be nothing. These hills have a way of making a person feel eyes on their back. Despite his reassurance, Kingston adjusted their course, leading them into rougher country where pursuing riders would have more difficulty following. The path narrowed, forcing them to ride single file along a rocky ridge. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain from distant clouds massing in the west. They had just descended into a small valley, thick with juniper and scrub oak, when Kingston suddenly reined his horse to a stop, raising one hand in warning. Scarlett halted behind him, holding her breath as she strained to hear what had alarmed him. The crack of a rifle shot split the air, and Kingston's horse reared as dirt exploded near its hooves. In an instant, Kingston had dismounted, dragging Scarlett from her saddle as a second shot rang out. "Run!" he shouted, pushing her toward the cover of the trees. "Follow the creek bed, I'll hold them off. I'm not leaving you," she protested, drawing her pistol. Kingston's blue eyes met hers, fierce with determination. "Scarlett, go, that's an order." Another shot, closer this time, decided the matter for her. With a last frustrated glance at Kingston, Scarlett turned and ran for the tree line, her heart hammering in her chest. Behind her, she heard Kingston's rifle respond to the attackers, the steady bark of the weapon providing cover for her escape. The dry creek bed offered minimal protection, but it was better than nothing. Scarlett followed it as it twisted through the trees, staying low, her pistol clutched tightly in her hand. The sounds of gunfire grew more distant as she moved, torn between relief at her own escape and worry for Kingston. She had covered perhaps half a mile when the crack of a branch nearby froze her in place. Slowly, she raised her head above the creek bank, scanning the surrounding trees. Nothing moved. Then, a rustle of leaves to her left. Scarlett swung around, her pistol aimed and ready, only to find herself staring into the barrel of another gun. The man holding it was tall and lean, with a weathered face and cold, calculating eyes. "Miss Reynolds, I presume," he drawled, his thin lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've led us on quite a chase." "Who are you?" Scarlett demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Name's Harker. Mr. Blackwell hired me to bring you back to San Angelo," the man replied. "Dead or alive, though he'd prefer alive. Wants to see you hang properly." "That's not going to happen," Scarlett said, her finger tightening on the trigger. Harker's smile widened. "You might be fast, girl, but you ain't that fast. Put the gun down and maybe I'll bring you back in one piece." For a heartbeat, Scarlett considered her options. She could shoot, might even hit him, but his gun was already aimed at her heart. They would fire at the same moment and both would likely die. "I count to 3, Harker said, cocking his pistol. 1. A shot rang out, and Harker's expression froze in surprise. Blood blossomed on his chest, spreading quickly across his shirt front before he toppled sideways into the creek bed, his unfired gun falling from limp fingers. Scarlett whirled around to see Kingston standing a few yards away, his rifle still raised, a thin trail of smoke curling from the barrel. "You all right?" he asked, lowering the weapon as he strode toward her. "Yes," she managed, her voice shaky with relief. "How did you find me?" "Followed the creek, same as you," he replied, glancing down at Harker's body. "Recognized him. He's one of the best trackers in Texas. If Blackwell hired him, he's serious about finding you." "Were there others?" Scarlett asked, holstering her pistol with a hand that trembled slightly. "2," Kingston confirmed grimly. "They won't be following us anymore." The implication was clear, and Scarlett nodded her understanding. Kingston Hayes was clearly more than just a small-town sheriff. The skill and ruthless efficiency with which he dispatched 3 professional bounty hunters spoke of a man well acquainted with violence. "We need to move," Kingston continued, taking her elbow gently. "There could be more of them, and those shots will have carried for miles." Scarlett allowed him to guide her back upstream, where they found the horses waiting nervously near the site of the initial ambush. There was no sign of the other bounty hunters, but Scarlett noticed Kingston's grim expression as he checked his gelding for injuries. "Your horse okay?" she asked, untying Whisper's reins from a nearby bush. "He will be," Kingston replied, running a hand along the animal's flank where a shallow graze marred the dark coat. "Bullet just nicked him. It could have been much worse." They mounted quickly and set off at a faster pace than before, pushing the horses hard despite the approaching dusk. Neither spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts as the landscape rolled past, the setting sun casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. It was nearly dark when Kingston finally reined in his horse at the top of a gentle rise. Before them stretched a broad valley, and in the distance, Scarlett could make out the faint glow of lights. "Sam's place," Kingston informed her, relief evident in his voice. "We made it." The Winters Ranch was larger than Scarlett had expected, a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by well-maintained fences and corrals. As they approached, dogs began to bark, and moments later, a figure appeared on the porch of the main house, a lantern held high. "Who goes there?" A deep voice called out. "It's King Hayes," Kingston shouted back. "We're coming in, Sam." The lantern lowered slightly and the figure stepped forward. "King, that really you, in the flesh," Kingston replied as they rode into the circle of light cast by the lantern. "Sorry for the late arrival." Samuel Winters was a bear of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard streaked with gray and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He set the lantern down and clasped Kingston's hand firmly as the sheriff dismounted. "Been too long, my friend," Sam said warmly before turning his attention to Scarlett. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Scarlett Reynolds," Kingston introduced her as he helped her down from her horse. "She's in some trouble, Sam. We both are." Understanding dawned in the rancher's eyes, and he nodded solemnly. "Well, you've come to the right place. Trouble has a way of disappearing once it crosses onto Winter's land." He ushered them into the house, where the warmth of a blazing fire and the aroma of cooking food welcomed them. A tall, handsome woman with silver-streaked dark hair rose from a chair by the hearth as they entered. "Maria, we have guests," Sam announced. "This is King Hayes, my old war buddy I've told you about, and Miss Scarlett Reynolds." "Welcome to our home," Maria Winters said, her voice carrying a slight Spanish accent. "You both look exhausted and hungry. Come sit. Dinner is almost ready." Scarlett hadn't realized how tense she'd been until that moment, when the simple kindness of strangers allowed her to finally lower her guard. She sank into a chair at the large oak table, accepting a cup of hot coffee from Maria with murmured thanks. Kingston sat beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers, a solid presence that had somehow become a source of comfort in the short time they'd known each other. As Sam and Maria bustled about, setting out plates and serving a hearty stew, Scarlett found herself studying Kingston's profile in the flickering firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He must have felt her gaze because he turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised in silent question. Scarlett quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. "So," Sam said as they all settled around the table, "what kind of trouble are we talking about, King?" Kingston explained the situation concisely, sparing Scarlett from having to relive the details again. Sam and Maria listened without interruption, their expressions growing increasingly grave. "Jason Blackwell," Sam mused when Kingston finished. "I've had dealings with him in the past. Cold-blooded businessman, treats his workers like dirt. Can't say I'm surprised his son turned out to be a scoundrel. The problem is, Blackwell has money and influence," Kingston continued. "He's not going to let this go, especially now that I've killed 3 of his hired guns." "You can stay here as long as needed," Sam assured them both. "The ranch is well protected and we're far enough from Texas that Blackwell's reach is limited." "We appreciate that, Sam," Kingston nodded, "but I don't want to bring trouble to your door. A few days rest and we'll move on." "Nonsense," Maria interjected firmly. "The winter is coming and the mountain passes will soon be snowbound. You cannot travel safely for at least several months." Sam nodded his agreement. "Maria's right. Besides, I could use the extra hands around here. My foreman left last month, and we're short-handed with the winter preparations." Kingston glanced at Scarlett, a silent question in his eyes. She considered their options: continuing to run, always looking over their shoulders, or staying put in a secure location until the worst of the pursuit died down. The choice seemed clear. "We'll stay," she decided, "at least until spring." "Good," Sam smiled, raising his coffee cup in a toast. "To safe harbors and new beginnings." Later, after a meal that left Scarlett feeling more contented than she had in weeks, Maria showed them to separate rooms in the eastern wing of the sprawling ranch house. "The washroom is at the end of the hall," the older woman explained, handing Scarlett a stack of clean linens. "I've left some of my daughter's clothes in the wardrobe. She's about your size, and she won't mind you using them until we can get you some things of your own." "Thank you," Scarlett said, genuinely moved by the woman's kindness. "For everything. You don't even know me, yet you've welcomed me into your home." Maria smiled, patting Scarlett's cheek gently. "Any friend of Kingston's is welcome here. Besides, I can see in your eyes that you are a good person who has suffered much. Rest now. Things will look brighter in the morning." Alone in the comfortable guest room, Scarlett sat on the edge of the soft bed, the events of the past few days finally catching up with her. She was safe, at least for now, thanks to a sheriff who had no reason to help her except his own sense of justice and compassion. A light knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. Opening it, she found Kingston standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands and his hair still damp from washing. "Just wanted to check on you before turning in," he said. "How's the wound?" "Much better," she assured him. "Barely hurts at all now." He nodded, seeming relieved. "Good, that's good." He hesitated, as if there was more he wanted to say but couldn't find the words. "Thank you," Scarlett said into the silence, "for saving my life today and for bringing me here." Kingston's expression softened. "You're welcome, Scarlett. Try to get some rest. We're safe here." As he turned to go, Scarlett impulsively reached out, catching his hand. Kingston froze, his eyes widening slightly as he looked back at her. "I mean it," she said quietly. "I wouldn't have made it this far without you, Kingston Hayes." For a long moment they stood there, connected by the simple touch of her hand on his. Something passed between them, unspoken but powerful, a recognition of a bond forming that neither had expected. "Good night, Scarlett," Kingston finally said, his voice lower, rougher than before. "Good night, Kingston," she replied, slowly releasing his hand. He nodded once, then walked away down the hall, leaving Scarlett to close her door and lean against it, her heart beating faster than it should have been for such a brief encounter. That night, for the first time since fleeing San Angelo, Scarlett slept deeply and dreamlessly, the weight of constant fear temporarily lifted from her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now she was safe. And strangely, despite everything, she felt a flicker of hope, a feeling she had almost forgotten was possible. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Scarlett with its comfort and ease. The winter's ranch, sprawling across thousands of acres of New Mexico territory, became a sanctuary where she gradually let down her guard, allowing herself to breathe without constantly looking over her shoulder. Kingston seamlessly stepped into the role of ranch foreman, his natural leadership and extensive knowledge of cattle earning him the respect of the ranch hands. Scarlett found her own place helping Maria with household management and taking over the ranch's ledgers, her quick mind for numbers proving invaluable as winter approached and supplies needed careful tracking. October gave way to November, bringing colder temperatures and the first dusting of snow on the distant mountains. The days grew shorter, and evenings were spent gathered around the large fireplace in the main house, sharing stories and meals that fostered a growing sense of family that Scarlett hadn't experienced since her father's death. And through it all, there was Kingston, working side by side during the day, sharing quiet conversations in the evenings, gradually revealing more of themselves to each other as trust deepened. Scarlett found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his face relaxed when he laughed, how gentle his hands could be despite their strength, the quiet confidence with which he moved through the world. "You're staring again," Maria observed one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the ranch hands who would soon return from the day's work. Scarlett felt heat rise to her cheeks as she focused intently on the vegetables she was chopping. "I don't know what you mean." Maria's knowing smile said otherwise. "He watches you too when you are not looking. We've been through a lot together," Scarlett replied, attempting to sound casual. "It's natural to be aware of each other." "Is that what you call it, awareness?" Maria laughed softly, stirring a pot of stew on the large cook stove. "In my country, we have other words for the way you two look at each other." Before Scarlett could formulate a response, the back door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the subject of their conversation. Kingston stomped snow from his boots before entering, his cheeks ruddy from the cold and his hat dusted with white. "Smells wonderful in here," he remarked, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "Need any help?" "Perfect timing," Maria declared, handing him a stack of plates. "You can set the table while Scarlett finishes the vegetables." Kingston moved to comply, passing close enough to Scarlett that she caught the scent of cold air and leather that clung to him. Their eyes met briefly, and Scarlett quickly looked away, Maria's words still ringing in her ears. Dinner that evening was a lively affair, with Sam regaling them with stories of his and Kingston's army days, tactfully edited for mixed company, but entertaining nonetheless. Scarlett noticed how relaxed Kingston seemed here, laughing more freely than she'd ever seen him, occasionally jumping in to correct Sam's more outlandish embellishments. "That's not how it happened, and you know it," Kingston protested after a particularly dramatic retelling of a skirmish with Comanche warriors. "There were 5 at most, not 20. 5, 20. What's the difference when you're staring down the wrong end of an arrow?" Sam winked at Scarlett. "The point is, your sheriff here saved the entire patrol with nothing but a pistol and a broken bottle." "Former sheriff," Kingston corrected automatically, though his tone was light. "I doubt Willow Creek still considers me their lawman after I disappeared without notice." "Speaking of which," Sam said, his expression growing more serious, "I had word from town today. Seems there are men asking questions about newcomers to the area, specifically a tall lawman and a dark-haired woman." The easy atmosphere around the table evaporated instantly, replaced by a tension that Scarlett felt in every muscle of her body. "Blackwell's men?" she asked, her voice tight. Sam nodded grimly. "Most likely. They didn't come out to the ranch, but they've been in every saloon and store in the territory for the past week, offering money for information." Kingston's jaw tightened as he looked at Scarlett, concern evident in his eyes. "We might need to move on sooner than we thought." "Nonsense," Sam declared firmly. "None of my men would betray you, and the townspeople around here are no friends to bounty hunters or Texas cattle barons. You're safer here than anywhere else, especially with winter coming on." "Sam's right," Maria added. "The first major snow will close the passes soon, and no one will be able to reach the ranch until spring. By then, Perhaps this Blackwell will have given up his search. Scarlett wanted to believe them, but the knot of fear that had briefly loosened during her time at the ranch tightened once more. She excused herself shortly after dinner, needing time alone to collect her thoughts. The night was clear and cold as she stepped onto the porch, stars glittering like ice crystals in the vast black sky. Scarlett wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Behind her, the door opened and closed quietly, and she knew without turning who had followed her out. "You're going to freeze out here," Kingston said, moving to stand beside her at the porch railing. "Just needed some air," she replied, not looking at him. "I'd almost forgotten, that we're fugitives." Kingston was silent for a moment, his profile stern in the dim light spilling from the windows. "We could keep running," he finally said. "Head farther west, maybe California. Start over somewhere no one knows us." "Is that what you want?" Scarlett asked, finally turning to face him. His blue eyes searched her face. "What I want," he said slowly, "is for you to be safe, to have a chance at a normal life without always looking over your shoulder." "And what about you?" she pressed. "What about your life, Kingston? You gave up everything to help me, your job, your home. Why?" The question had been building inside her for weeks, demanding an answer that went beyond his simple explanation of understanding her situation. Kingston sighed, his breath forming a white cloud between them. "At first, it was because it was the right thing to do. You didn't deserve to be hunted for defending yourself." He paused, his gaze dropping to the weathered boards beneath their feet. "But now?" "Now?" Scarlett prompted when he fell silent. Kingston looked up then, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Now, it's because I can't imagine being anywhere you're not, Scarlett Reynolds." The confession hung in the cold air between them, sincere and unexpected despite the growing closeness they'd shared. Scarlett felt something shift inside her, a wall carefully constructed over years of self-reliance beginning to crumble. "Kingston," she whispered, uncertain what else to say. He stepped closer, one hand rising to gently touch her cheek. "I know we haven't known each other long," he said quietly. "And I know this isn't the best timing, but I'm falling in love with you, Scarlett. I think I have been since that first day in Willow Creek when you warned me you were nothing but trouble." A small laugh escaped her, part nervous, part relieved. "And you said you liked trouble." "I do," he smiled, his thumb lightly tracing the curve of her cheek. "Especially when it comes with green eyes and more courage than any woman I've ever met." Scarlett leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "I'm scared, Kingston. Not of Blackwell or bounty hunters, but of feeling something I can't control." "I know," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Me too. But some risks are worth taking, don't you think?" Instead of answering with words, Scarlett closed the distance between them, rising on her toes to press her lips to his. Kingston froze for a heartbeat, then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as he deepened the kiss. His mouth was warm despite the cold night, his touch gentle yet insistent as one hand cradled the back of her head. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Kingston rested his forehead against hers. "I'd say that's a yes," he murmured, a smile in his voice. Scarlett laughed softly, feeling lighter than she had in years despite the dangers that still threatened them. "That's definitely a yes." They stood together on the porch for a long while afterward, Kingston's arm around her shoulders as they watched the stars, talking quietly about possibilities neither had dared consider before. And when they finally returned to the warmth of the house, something had fundamentally changed between them, a commitment made without formal words, but binding nonetheless. That night, lying in her bed, Scarlett realized that for the first time since her father's death, she had found something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. Whatever came next, she would face it with Kingston beside her, and somehow that made all the difference. Winter descended on the Winters ranch with a fury that seemed determined to match its namesake. December brought blizzards that buried the landscape in drifts taller than a man, sealing the mountain passes and isolating the ranch from the outside world, just as Maria had predicted. For Scarlett and Kingston, the enforced seclusion was a blessing in disguise, allowing them to set aside their fears and focus on the growing bond between them. Christmas at the ranch was unlike anything Scarlett had experienced before. The Mexican traditions Maria had brought with her blended with American customs to create a celebration filled with warmth and joy, despite the howling winds outside. There were candles in paper bags lining the pathways between buildings, spiced cider that warmed from the inside out, and handmade gifts exchanged with genuine affection. Kingston gave Scarlett a delicate silver locket he'd commissioned from a silversmith in town. Before the snows came a replacement for her mother's, which had been lost during their flight from Texas. She gave him a finely crafted leather journal, having noticed how he sometimes wrote in the evenings, recording thoughts he never shared aloud. "What do you write about?" she asked as they sat before the fire that night, the rest of the household having retired. Kingston turned the journal over in his hands, his expression thoughtful. "Memories, mostly. Things I don't want to forget." He glanced at her, a smile warming his eyes. "Lately, I've been writing about you." "About me?" Scarlett raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What about me?" "The way you look in the morning light," he said softly. "How your eyes change color depending on your mood. The sound of your laugh when Sam tells one of his outrageous stories." Scarlett felt a blush warm her cheeks. "I didn't realize I was being so carefully studied." Kingston reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. "I'm a thorough man, Miss Reynolds. When something captivates me, I pay attention to every detail." Their relationship had progressed slowly but steadily over the weeks, each day bringing a new discovery, a deeper understanding. They had not rushed the physical aspect, both recognizing that what was building between them deserved patience and care. But sitting there in the firelight, Kingston's thumb tracing small circles on her palm, Scarlett felt a familiar warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the flames crackling in the hearth. "Kingston," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think I'm ready for you to stop being such a gentleman." His eyes darkened as he understood her meaning, and he raised their joined hands to press a kiss to her knuckles. "Are you sure?" In answer, Scarlett leaned forward and kissed him, not the gentle exchanges they'd shared before, but something deeper, more insistent. Kingston responded immediately, one hand coming up to tangle in her hair as he pulled her closer. "Not here," he murmured against her lips after a moment. "Sam and Maria." Scarlett nodded, standing and tugging him to his feet. Without a word, she led him down the hall to her room, closing the door softly behind them. In the dim light of a single lamp, they came together with a tenderness that gradually gave way to urgency. Kingston's hands were gentle yet sure as they explored her body, his mouth tracing paths that left her gasping. When they finally joined, it was with a sense of rightness, of completion, that brought tears to Scarlett's eyes. Afterward, lying in the circle of Kingston's arms, her head on his chest and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Scarlett felt a peace she had almost forgotten was possible. "I love you," she said quietly, the words coming easily now that they'd been in her heart for so long. "I think I have almost from the beginning, though I tried not to." Kingston's arms tightened around her, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you too, Scarlett, more than I thought possible." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the howling winter storm outside no match for the warmth they'd found together. January gave way to February, and still, the snow showed no signs of melting. The ranch operated at a slower pace during these months, with the men focusing on essential maintenance and caring for the livestock, while everyone looked forward to spring. Kingston and Scarlett settled into a routine, sharing her room now without pretense, their relationship accepted without comment by Sam and Maria, who seemed genuinely happy for them. It was during a rare clear day in late February that the peace of their winter sanctuary was shattered. Scarlett was in the barn with Kingston, helping to treat a mare that had developed a cough, when the distant sound of approaching horses reached them. Kingston's head snapped up, his expression instantly alert. "Stay here," he ordered, moving to the barn door and peering out. "Who is it?" Scarlett asked, fear coiling in her stomach as she set aside the blanket she'd been holding. "6 riders," Kingston replied grimly, reaching for the rifle that was never far from his side these days. "Coming up the main road." Scarlett moved to stand beside him, her heart pounding as she spotted the approaching group. "Bounty hunters, maybe," Kingston nodded, "or Blackwell himself. Either way, I don't like it." He whistled sharply, catching the attention of 2 ranch hands working nearby, and motioned them over with quick, efficient gestures. "Get back to the house," he told them. "Tell Sam we have visitors. 6 men, armed, approaching from the east. Then get everyone inside and make sure all the buildings are secured." The men nodded and took off running toward the main house as Kingston turned to Scarlett, his expression torn between concern and determination. "You should go with them," he said, though he already knew what her response would be. "I'm not leaving you," she replied firmly, drawing the pistol she now carried as habitually as Kingston carried his. "We face this together." Kingston hesitated, then nodded, a flash of pride in his eyes. "Together, then. But we stay smart. No heroics." They moved to the side door of the barn, positioning themselves where they could see the approaching riders without being immediately visible. As the group drew closer, Scarlett could make out more details: all men, heavily armed, their horses showing signs of a long, difficult journey through the snow. The lead rider was older than the others, his silver hair visible beneath his hat, his bearing that of a man accustomed to command. Even from a distance, there was something familiar about him that sent a chill through Scarlett's blood. "Blackwell," she whispered, recognizing the cattle baron she'd worked for, the father of the man she'd killed. Kingston's jaw tightened as he nodded. Looks like he decided to handle this personally. Before they could decide on a course of action, Sam emerged from the main house, rifle in hand but held non-threateningly at his side. He strode toward the approaching riders, his posture relaxed but alert. "That's far enough," Sam called out when the group was still 20 yards from the house. "This is private property. State your business." The silver-haired man raised a hand, signaling his companions to halt. "My name is Jason Blackwell," he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "I'm looking for a woman named Scarlett Reynolds, and a man who may be with her, a former sheriff from Texas." Sam's stance didn't change, but his voice took on a harder edge. "And what business would you have with these people if they were here?" "The woman murdered my son," Blackwell replied, his tone flat. "The man helped her escape justice. I aim to see them both answer for their crimes." "Murder?" Sam repeated, skepticism evident in his voice. "That's not the story I heard." Blackwell's expression darkened. "I'm not interested in stories, Mr. Winters. I know you're harboring fugitives, and I want them turned over to me now." "How do you know my name?" Sam demanded, raising his rifle slightly. "I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with," Blackwell replied coldly. "Just as I know you have no legal right to interfere in a Texas matter." Those two are coming with me, one way or another." Kingston stepped out of the barn then, his rifle held ready but not yet aimed at Blackwell or his men. "That's not going to happen, Jason," he called out, moving to stand beside Sam. Blackwell's eyes narrowed as he focused on Kingston. "Sheriff Hayes, I should have known you'd be involved in this. Always had a soft spot for lost causes, didn't you?" "This isn't a lost cause," Kingston replied evenly. "And I'm not a sheriff anymore, thanks to you." A cold smile curved Blackwell's lips. "Yes, I heard about your hasty departure from Willow Creek. The town council wasn't pleased to discover their trusted lawman had aided a murderer's escape." "It wasn't murder," Kingston said, his voice hard now. "Your son attacked Scarlett. She defended herself as any person has the right to do." "Lies," Blackwell spat. "My son would never. Your son was a predator." Scarlett's voice rang out as she stepped from the barn to stand beside Kingston. "And you know it. How many other women did you pay off when Gerald couldn't keep his hands to himself? How many others weren't as lucky as I was?" Blackwell's face contorted with rage at the sight of her. "You dare to slander my son's name? You, a common servant who should have been grateful for the position you held in my household." "Grateful," Scarlett laughed bitterly. "For being harassed and assaulted. For being treated like property instead of a person." "Enough," Blackwell shouted, his control slipping. "You're coming with me, Reynolds. Both of you are." "I have the authority." "You have no authority here," Sam interrupted, his rifle now raised and pointed directly at Blackwell. "This is New Mexico territory, not Texas, and on my land I'm the only authority that matters." As if on cue, the front door of the main house opened, and Maria stepped out, a shotgun in her hands. From other buildings around the ranch, more figures emerged, ranch hands armed with rifles and pistols, all taking positions that effectively surrounded Blackwell and his men. For a tense moment, no one spoke, the only sound the occasional snort of a nervous horse or the creak of leather as men adjusted their grips on their weapons. "You're outnumbered, Blackwell," Kingston observed calmly. "And you're trespassing. I suggest you turn around and head back to Texas before this gets ugly." Blackwell's eyes darted around, assessing the situation. Despite his rage, he was a businessman first, calculating odds and potential losses. Finally, he straightened in his saddle, his expression cold but composed once more. "This isn't over, Hayes," he warned. "The woman killed my son. There's no statute of limitations on murder and no border that will protect her forever." "It was self-defense," Kingston repeated firmly. "And if you force the issue, all the sordid details of your son's behavior will become public knowledge. Is that what you want, Jason? For everyone to know what kind of man Gerald really was?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackwell's face for the first time. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Kingston countered. "Scarlett wasn't the first woman your son assaulted, was she? There were others in San Angelo and beyond, women who were too afraid to speak up because of your money and influence, but they might find their courage if they knew they weren't alone." Blackwell's jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched in his cheek. For a long moment, he stared at Kingston and Scarlett, hatred evident in every line of his face. Then, with a visible effort, he reined in his emotions. "This isn't the end of it," he said finally, his voice cold with suppressed rage. "I will see justice for my son." "Your son got justice," Scarlett replied steadily. "Exactly what he deserved, no more and no less. Go home, Mr. Blackwell. Go home and grieve for the man your son really was, not the fiction you've created to ease your conscience." Without another word, Blackwell yanked his horse around and spurred it back the way they had come, his men following quickly behind. The group watched until the riders disappeared over a distant ridge, and only then did the tension begin to ease from the air. "You think he'll be back?" Sam asked, lowering his rifle. Kingston's expression was grim as he put his arm around Scarlett's shoulders. "Not anytime soon. The passes will be closed again after the next storm and by spring." He looked down at Scarlett, a question in his eyes. "By spring, we'll be long gone," she finished for him, understanding immediately. Their sanctuary had been compromised. It was time to move on. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their room, Kingston held Scarlett close, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "Where will we go?" she asked quietly, her head on his chest. "West," he replied. "California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere we can start fresh, where Blackwell's influence doesn't reach." Scarlett was silent for a long moment, considering. "Will we ever stop running, Kingston?" he sighed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Blackwell won't pursue us forever. He's a businessman, and eventually the cost will outweigh the benefit. But until then, yes, we keep moving." "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for dragging you into this, for making you give up your life." Kingston silenced her with a gentle kiss. "Don't ever apologize for that," he said firmly when they parted. "My life before you was half-lived at best. Empty, aimless. Now I have something worth fighting for, someone worth building a future with." Scarlett raised herself on one elbow to look down at him, her hair falling like a curtain around them both. "Is that what you want? A future with me?" Kingston reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his expression soft in the moonlight filtering through the window. "More than anything," he said simply. "Marry me, Scarlett, not because we're running or because we need each other to survive, but because I love you and can't imagine spending a single day of my life without you." Tears welled in Scarlett's eyes, surprising her. She hadn't cried since her father's death, had thought herself beyond such displays of emotion. Yet here she was, weeping at a declaration of love from a man who had risked everything for her. "Yes," she whispered, the word catching slightly on the lump in her throat. "Yes, I'll marry you, Kingston Hayes." He pulled her down into a kiss that sealed their promise, and for that moment the future with all its uncertainties seemed less daunting. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Spring arrived with a gradual warming of the air, and the slow retreat of the snow that had isolated the winter's ranch for months. As the mountain passes cleared, preparations began for Scarlett and Kingston's departure, and for the small wedding ceremony that would precede it. Maria threw herself into the arrangements with enthusiasm, declaring that no one would leave her home without proper celebration, especially not a bride and groom. Sam, meanwhile, arranged for a circuit preacher who occasionally visited the remote ranches to perform the ceremony, along with procuring the necessary license from the territorial authority. On a clear April morning, with the mountains still snow-capped but the valley bursting with new life, Scarlett stood in her room, looking at herself in the mirror as Maria adjusted the simple white dress they had sewn together over the past weeks. "You look beautiful, Mija," Maria said, her eyes warm with maternal affection. "Kingston will not be able to speak when he sees you." Scarlett smiled, touching the silver locket that hung around her neck, Kingston's Christmas gift, now containing a small photograph of the two of them that Sam had taken with his prized camera. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted quietly. "After everything that happened, a wedding seemed like something meant for other women, not for me." "Life has a way of surprising us," Maria replied, patting her shoulder. "Sometimes with sorrow, yes, but also with joy when we least expect it." A soft knock at the door preceded Sam's entrance, his usually rugged appearance softened by a clean suit and freshly trimmed beard. "It's time," he announced, offering his arm to Scarlett. "Your groom is waiting, and if his pacing wears a hole in my porch, you'll be paying for the repairs." Scarlett laughed, taking Sam's arm with a grateful smile. With Maria leading the way, they made their way through the house and out to the front yard, where a small gathering had assembled beneath an arch of early spring flowers. The ranch hands stood in a respectful semicircle, cleaned up for the occasion, while the preacher waited with his Bible open. And there was Kingston, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed and his blue eyes bright with emotion as they fixed on Scarlett. The look of wonder on his face as she approached made her heart swell with a happiness so intense it was almost painful. The ceremony was simple and brief, traditional vows exchanged with steady voices despite the emotion evident in both their faces. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Kingston pulled Scarlett into a kiss that drew cheers and good-natured whistles from the assembled ranch hands. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food and drink flowing freely. Music provided by a couple of the hands who proved surprisingly talented with fiddle and harmonica. Kingston and Scarlett danced beneath the stars, their faces illuminated by lantern light, their future stretched out before them like the vast western sky. "Mrs. Hayes," Kingston murmured as they swayed together, his arms strong and secure around her waist. "How does it sound?" "Wonderful," Scarlett replied, her head resting on his shoulder. "Though I think I'll always be trouble, even with a new name." Kingston laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest beneath her cheek. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The next morning, they said their goodbyes to Sam and Maria, promising to write when they settled somewhere permanent. Their horses were packed with supplies and gifts, including a small strongbox containing a wedding present from Sam, enough money to give them a solid start wherever they chose to build their new life. "Head north," Sam advised as they mounted up. "Oregon Territory is growing fast, but there's still plenty of good land for those willing to work it, and it's about as far from Texas as you can get without falling into the Pacific." Kingston nodded, reaching over to shake his friend's hand firmly. "We can never repay you for everything you've done." "Live well," Sam replied simply. "Be happy. That's payment enough." With final waves and promises to stay in touch, Scarlett and Kingston rode away from the Winters ranch, heading northwest toward the distant mountains. They traveled slowly but steadily, taking their time and enjoying the journey, no longer pursued but simply progressing toward a future of their own choosing. By midsummer, they had reached the lush green valleys of Oregon Territory, a land so different from the Texas plains that it felt like another world entirely. They found a small settlement near the Willamette River that was growing rapidly, but still had plenty of available land nearby. "What do you think?" Kingston asked as they stood on a gentle rise overlooking a stretch of unclaimed valley, fertile and well-watered, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. "Could you see us building a life here?" Scarlett took in the view, imagining a house nestled among those trees, fields of crops, perhaps even cattle grazing on the hillsides. "It's perfect," she decided, squeezing his hand. "Our own piece of the world, far from everything we left behind." They purchased the land the next day, using a portion of Sam's generous gift, and set about building their home. Kingston proved as skilled with carpentry as he had been with a lawman's duties, while Scarlett established a large garden that would see them through their first winter in Oregon. Word of Kingston's background as a sheriff soon spread through the growing settlement, and before long, he found himself once again being asked to take on a leadership role. This time, however, he set clear boundaries, agreeing to help establish a local constabulary but refusing to serve as the sole authority. "I have other priorities now," he explained to the town council, his arm around Scarlett's waist. As their first anniversary approached, their homestead had taken shape, A sturdy two-story house stood where they had once envisioned it, surrounded by fields of wheat and corn, with a small herd of cattle grazing on the hillside pastures. They had hired help for the larger farming operations, a young couple named Thomas and Emily who lived in a smaller cabin on the property, and Scarlett had news that would make their family complete. "Kingston," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, his expression curious. "What is it?" Scarlett took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach, still flat but containing their future. "We're going to have a baby, in the winter." Kingston's eyes widened, then filled with such joy that Scarlett felt tears spring to her own. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction had already answered the question. Kingston drew back to look at her, his hands cradling her face. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've given me everything, Scarlett, love, a home, and now a family. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Kingston's hand resting protectively over the place where their child grew, Scarlett reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate fugitive to a beloved wife and soon-to-be mother, from a life of constant fear to one of peace and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Kingston asked softly, sensing her wakefulness. "How strange life is," she replied, turning to face him. "If Gerald Blackwell hadn't attacked me that night, if you hadn't been the sheriff of Willow Creek when I passed through, we might never have met." Kingston traced the line of her jaw with gentle fingers. "I don't believe that," he said. "Some things are meant to be, Scarlett. I think we would have found each other somehow, no matter what." Scarlett smiled in the darkness, pressing closer to the warmth of his body. "I think you might be right," she murmured. "After all, you did say you've always liked trouble." Kingston's laugh was warm against her skin. "And I always will," he promised, sealing the words with a kiss. In December of 1879, as snow fell gently outside the windows of their Oregon homestead, Scarlett gave birth to a healthy baby boy. With Kingston by her side, holding her hand through every moment of labor, she brought their son into the world, a robust infant with his father's blue eyes and a tuft of dark hair that promised to be as unruly as his mother's. "What shall we call him?" Kingston asked, cradling the newborn with a tenderness that made Scarlett's heart swell with love. She considered for a moment, then smiled. "Samuel," she decided. "Samuel Thomas Hayes, after the men who helped give him a chance at life." Kingston nodded his approval, his eyes suspiciously bright as he looked down at their son. "It's perfect. Welcome to the world, Samuel." As the years passed, their family and their homestead continued to grow. A daughter joined them 2 years after Samuel, Elizabeth Maria, named for Kingston's mother and their dear friend in New Mexico. The Hayes farm became one of the most prosperous in the valley, known for its fine cattle and bountiful harvests. Scarlett never forgot the fear and danger that had marked the beginning of their journey together. But those memories faded with time, replaced by the joyful chaos of family life and the deep, abiding love she shared with Kingston. Occasionally, news would reach them from Texas. Jason Blackwell had died of a stroke in 1882. His vast holdings divided among distant relatives. The bounty for Scarlett had been officially withdrawn, though by then it hardly mattered. Oregon was their home now, their past in Texas, nothing more than a distant chapter in their story. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kingston surprised Scarlett with a special gift, a new silver locket to replace the one he'd given her years before, which had become worn from constant handling. "Open it," he urged as they sat together on their porch swing, the children already asleep inside. Scarlett did so, finding not a photograph but a small, carefully folded piece of paper. Curious, she unfolded it to discover a message written in Kingston's neat hand. To my beloved wife, who brought meaning to my life when I was merely existing. Thank you for taking a chance on trouble. Forever yours, Kingston. Tears blurred Scarlett's vision as she read the simple words, feeling the weight of their shared history and the blessing of their present happiness. I love you, she whispered, leaning into his embrace, more with each passing day. Kingston's arms tightened around her, solid and secure as they had been from the first moment he'd promised to help her escape. And I love you, Scarlett Hayes, trouble and all. As twilight deepened into night around their home, Scarlett reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. From a desperate woman on the run to a respected pioneer wife and mother, she had transformed her life through courage, determination, and the love of a man who had seen beyond her warnings to the heart beneath. I'm nothing but trouble, she had warned him once, so long ago. And still, after all these years, Kingston's response remained the same, a smile that reached his eyes and the simple declaration that had changed both their lives forever. I've always liked trouble. In that knowledge, secure in each other's love and the life they had built together, Scarlett and Kingston Hayes watched the stars emerge above their Oregon home, their story still unfolding with each new day, no longer fugitives, but forever adventurers in the grand journey they shared.